When my cousins came to visit and never left, I discovered they were here to reclaim our family's position in society at my expense, hey Reddit, I need some advice. I'm Lucas, 28, and this past month has thrown my life completely off track. What started as a casual, surprise visit from my cousins turned into a twisted game of family dynamics, control, and the unsettling feeling that I'm being used for something I still don't fully understand. Let me back up a bit and explain. A few weeks ago, I got a text from my cousin Chloe. It was out of the blue. She said she and her older brother, Mason, were passing through my area and thought it'd be fun to drop by for a day or two. I hadn't seen either of them in a while, but I remembered them well enough to feel hesitant. Mason was always a little intense, and Chloe had this charm about her that she used to get her way. Still, family is family, right? When they showed up on my doorstep, it was pretty clear from the get-go that a day or two was a loose estimate. They had bags, like big bags, enough for at least a week, but I figured maybe they'd been road tripping or something, so I brushed it off. I mean, it was weird, but nothing worth stressing over. I told myself it was probably just a quirky last-minute visit. The first couple of days were fine, I guess. We caught up over takeout, and they shared stories about life in the city. Mason, 25, seemed to be in between jobs, though he was cagey about why he'd left his last one. Chloe, who's 21, dropped out of college to find herself, and according to her, I was lucky to have a stable, boring job, as she put it. I laughed it off because, well, I do have a pretty routine life as a tech consultant. Nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills. Things took a turn when they started getting comfortable. By day 3, I'd come home from work to find Mason and Chloe sprawled out in the living room like they'd always lived there. They'd cooked themselves dinner and left dishes in the sink, which was fine at first, but they didn't exactly offer to clean up after themselves. Chloe even moved some of my furniture around, claiming she was just feng shui the space for better energy. I'd catch Mason snooping around my office area, too, pretending he was just looking for something, but never saying what. I finally decided to bring it up, gently suggesting that if they needed a longer stay, maybe they could help out around the house a bit. Mason laughed it off, saying, "Don't worry, cousin, we're family. You can't put a price on that." I laughed too, but it felt forced. Something was off, but I couldn't quite place it. Then, one evening, I overheard a conversation between them. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was just coming down the stairs when I heard Mason say, "Look, this was the plan. We're here to help, to reestablish what our family lost." Chloe responded with something like, "He doesn't need to know yet. We'll bring it up when the time's right." I froze, feeling my stomach twist. I had no idea what they meant, but the tone was strange. Like they were talking about me as if I were a stranger in my own home. I almost confronted them right there, but decided to play it cool. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe they were just being weird. Over the next few days, things escalated. Mason started casually dropping hints about how lucky I was to have my house, a stable job, and a decent reputation. He'd say things like, "Not everyone has that, you know? Some of us weren't given those opportunities." It was clear he was talking about himself and Chloe, but the way he said it made it feel like he thought I'd somehow stolen this life from him. One evening, he brought up a family story I'd vaguely heard as a kid. Something about how our grandfathers had been in business together but had a falling out that left Mason and Chloe's side of the family struggling. It was a weird story that had always been wrapped in mystery, but Mason seemed to have a lot more details. He hinted that his dad had been wronged, that my family had somehow come out on top by stepping on theirs. The way he told it, he made it sound like I was somehow the direct benefactor of that ancient family feud. I didn't know what to say, so I tried brushing it off. That was, 3 generations ago. It's not like any of us had a hand in it. He gave me this smirk and said, "Maybe not, but you're still living in the results of it." It was unsettling. For one thing, I didn't even know Mason felt this way. We'd been on good terms as kids, or at least I thought we were. This tension was new, and the way he looked at me now made me feel like I was an outsider in my own life. I decided to do a little snooping of my own, so the next morning, while they were out getting some fresh air, I peeked into their bags. They had way more than just clothes. There were some notebooks, papers with handwritten notes, and even what looked like photocopies of old letters from family members. It was like they'd come here armed with research. That weirded me out even more, and I realized this wasn't just a casual family visit. They were here for something specific. I kept up appearances and pretended nothing was wrong, but my mind was spinning. I tried calling my mom to get some background on the family feud Mason mentioned, but she just brushed it off as ancient history and told me I was being paranoid. She reminded me that family is important and that I should be thankful they felt comfortable enough to stay with me. But I wasn't comfortable. I felt like my home was no longer my own, like my life had been invaded by this dark undercurrent of family duty that Mason and Chloe seemed to believe in with disturbing conviction. Then, 2 days ago, I woke up to find they'd changed the guest room into some kind of mini office space for Mason. He'd moved a desk in there, complete with his laptop, files, and even some framed family photos. Photos I didn't recognize. It was like he was setting up to stay indefinitely. When I confronted him about it, he just said, "I figured it'd be better for everyone if I was a little more settled. I have work to do too, you know." He said it with this intense look, like he was daring me to argue. So here I am, Reddit, stuck in my own house with two people who claim they're family but are acting more like they're trying to take over. I'm not even sure anymore. I need advice. Am I overreacting? Or is there something seriously wrong here? Because I'm starting to feel like this visit isn't going to end until they get whatever it is they came for. Update 1. Alright, Reddit. Thanks for the feedback on my last post. I wish I could say things improved after that, but if anything, they've gotten worse. I feel like I'm living in some kind of bizarre psychological thriller where the villains are my own cousins, and I'm not even sure what they're after. Here's what's happened since. So, after Mason practically moved into the guest room like it was his own private office, things really started to escalate. Mason and Chloe have this strange dynamic. They both clearly have their own agendas, but they're also working together in this weird, unspoken way. They act almost like they're on some mission, like they're taking notes on my life, which is exactly as unnerving as it sounds. It started with them integrating themselves more into my social life. I didn't think it was a big deal at first when Chloe asked if she could tag along with me to a friend's party. But then she started coming to every social event I went to, and she even began reaching out to my friends on her own. I'd get texts from people I hadn't spoken to in weeks, saying things like, "Hey, just heard from your cousin Chloe. She's really cool." Or "Chloe told me about the party. See you there?" It was subtle, but she was slowly embedding herself in my friend group, and they seemed to think it was completely normal. Mason, on the other hand, was taking a different approach. He'd become fascinated with my job. One evening, as I was working from home, he came up to me and started asking detailed questions about my projects. I figured he was just being polite, but he kept pushing, asking specifics about my clients, my deadlines, even my salary. When I laughed and said, "Is this a job interview?" he just stared at me and said, "No, I'm just trying to understand why you're in this position." I tried brushing it off, but he was relentless. He'd make these comments about how lucky I was to have security and how some people had to fight harder for their place in life. It was like he was implying I didn't deserve what I had, that I'd somehow cheated to get here. I didn't get it. What did my career have to do with him? The final straw came when I caught Mason in my home office, going through my laptop. I had gone to bed early that night, but I woke up in the middle of the night, thirsty and annoyed that I'd forgotten to fill my water bottle. As I walked downstairs, I saw a faint glow from the office, which should have been empty. When I peered inside, there was Mason, sitting at my desk, clicking through my files. I stood there, dumbfounded, before finally saying, "What the hell are you doing?" Mason barely even flinched. He looked up calmly, as if he'd been expecting me, and said, "Oh, sorry, I thought you wouldn't mind. I was just getting familiar with what you do here." By going through my computer? I snapped, furious. This is a massive invasion of privacy. You can't just do that. He didn't apologize. Instead, he said, "You need to calm down, Lucas. You're taking everything so personally. This is about the family, okay? We're here because our family deserves a place, and you just happen to have it first." I was completely speechless. That's when Chloe walked in, yawning as if she'd just woken up. She looked at us both and then said, "Lucas, you're making a big deal out of nothing. Mason's just trying to understand how we fit in here. That phrase, asterisk how we fit in here, asterisk it sent chills down my spine. I realized they weren't just visiting. They weren't even just trying to understand my life. They were trying to infiltrate it, to become a part of it in a way that made them necessary, almost irreplaceable. At that point, I tried kicking them out. I told them, in no uncertain terms, that I wanted them gone by the next morning. Mason just smirked and said, "I think you're forgetting that this house doesn't just belong to you." He went on to explain some twisted notion of family entitlement, as if the house itself was just as much his as it was mine, simply because we share the same blood. He said, "It's not like you bought this house with just your own effort. You're here because of the family support you got along the way, and it's time to pay that back." It was a ridiculous argument, but he said it with such conviction that I found myself questioning everything. I didn't even know where he was getting this from. As far as I know, we've never had any significant help from their side of the family. My parents worked hard to support us, and I paid my way through college with scholarships and part-time jobs. When I told them they were wrong and that they had no right to just take over my life, Chloe looked at me with a strange mix of pity and disdain. "Lucas, you don't understand. This is bigger than you. There's a family legacy at stake here, and whether you realize it or not, we're all a part of it. You can either help us reestablish what we lost, or, well, you can be part of the problem." I spent the rest of the night in my room, pacing and trying to wrap my head around what was happening. I knew I couldn't just let them steamroll over me, but every time I tried to confront them, they twisted it back on me, making me feel like I was the unreasonable one, like I was selfish for wanting my own life, my own home, to myself. The next day, they started reaching out to more people in my life. Chloe had apparently been talking to some of my coworkers at a networking event she'd somehow gotten herself invited to, and Mason had invited some of our extended family over for a reunion dinner without even asking me. Suddenly, I had cousins I barely knew, all flooding into my house, taking Chloe and Mason's side, praising them for being close to family and insinuating that I was somehow neglectful for not reaching out more often. During that dinner, Mason made a point of toasting to new beginnings and reclaiming the family legacy. He didn't explain what he meant, but I saw the look on his face, triumphant, like he'd already won. I wanted to stand up and tell everyone to get out, but I felt completely cornered. I didn't know how to explain what was happening without sounding paranoid or delusional. By the end of the night, I felt like a stranger in my own home. They'd successfully planted seeds of doubt in everyone's mind, painting me as some isolated, selfish guy who didn't care about his roots. Chloe kept emphasizing how important family was to her and how she'd always dreamed of reconnecting with the past. She had everyone eating out of the palm of her hand. I know it sounds strange, but I honestly felt like I was being erased. They were making themselves the center of my world, turning my life into their life. I didn't know who to trust, who to turn to, or how to make sense of any of it. I could feel my sense of control slipping away, bit by bit, and they just kept tightening their grip. It's only been a few weeks, but I feel like I've aged years. The house doesn't feel like mine anymore. My friends and family seem to be slipping away, and I have no idea what's coming next. Mason and Chloe are clearly playing some long game, one that I don't fully understand yet, but I know it's not in my favor. So here I am again. Reddit? I'm at a breaking point, feeling like a prisoner in my own life. I need advice more than ever. How do I get them out? And more importantly, what are they really after? Update 2. I'll be honest, Reddit. I'm at my wit's end. This visit from Mason and Chloe has turned into something sinister. They've gone from being annoying house guests to, well, something I can't even begin to describe. I'm starting to feel like a stranger in my own life, like they're slowly unthreading everything that made my life mine. After that disastrous family reunion dinner, things got weirdly quiet. I didn't hear from Mason or Chloe for a couple of days, which would have been a relief if I didn't feel like they were plotting something in the background. My house had taken on this strange, tense atmosphere, like I was constantly being watched. I tried going about my routine, but everywhere I turned, there was evidence of them. Little signs that they were still exerting control. One morning, I noticed some of my personal documents were missing. I kept a folder in my desk with things like my birth certificate, some tax records, and my employment contract. It wasn't the sort of thing I checked every day, but when I went to grab it, the folder was gone. I confronted Mason about it, but he just shrugged and said, "Maybe you misplaced it. People can be so careless with important documents." I knew I hadn't misplaced it. I'd always kept that folder in the same place, neatly organized. My stomach turned as I realized that he was gaslighting me, making me question my own memory. The worst part was, he said it with this cold smile that made it clear he knew exactly what he was doing. Things only got more disturbing from there. Chloe started reaching out to my closest friends with subtle, insidious comments. One friend of mine, Jamie, pulled me aside after a night out and said, "Hey, I know it's none of my business, but is everything okay at home? Chloe told me you've been under a lot of stress and that she's worried about you." I felt my jaw drop. Worried about me? I was the one who was losing control of my own life, and now they were painting me as unstable? I tried explaining the situation to Jamie, but she gave me this sympathetic look, like she thought I was spiraling. I could tell she didn't fully believe me. Chloe had already poisoned the well. Around that same time, Mason started insinuating that my job was at risk. He dropped comments like, "It wouldn't be hard for someone else to do what you do." Or, "Have you ever thought about how many people are waiting for a chance like yours?" It felt like he was testing me, pushing me to see how far he could go before I snapped. Then, last Thursday, things took an even darker turn. I came home from work to find Mason sitting at my desk, going through my work laptop. Not just snooping. He was logged in, scrolling through confidential files as if he had every right to be there. When I yelled at him, he looked up, completely unfazed, and said, "I was just trying to help. You've been so busy, I thought you could use a second pair of eyes." I was beyond furious. Help? By violating my privacy? By going through my work? He had the nerve to look hurt, like I was the one being unreasonable. "You're really overreacting, Lucas. You act like you're the only one allowed to touch anything in this house. It's just work. Don't take it so personally." I told him to leave, to get out of my office and never touch my things again. But he just shrugged and walked away, muttering something about how some people don't know how to appreciate help. At that moment, I knew he wasn't just trying to be invasive. He was actively trying to push me to the edge, to make me look like I was losing control. It was around then that I finally broke down and started digging into our family history. If they were so obsessed with this so-called family legacy, I figured I might as well find out what they thought they were entitled to. I spent hours calling relatives, combing through online records, and even visiting my mom's house to look at old family albums and letters. What I found wasn't exactly a shock, but it was unsettling. Apparently, my grandfather and Mason's grandfather had been business partners back in the day. They owned a small manufacturing company together, but after a falling out, my grandfather ended up buying out Mason's grandfather's share, leaving his side of the family with little. According to the letters I found, Mason's grandfather had blamed my grandfather for the downturn in their family's fortunes, claiming he'd been cut out unfairly. The thing is, no one in my immediate family had ever seen it that way. My grandfather had worked hard, and he made the best decision he could for the business. It wasn't some kind of power grab, but clearly, Mason and Chloe had grown up hearing a different version of the story. They seemed to believe they'd been wronged, that my family owed theirs something. Armed with this information, I decided it was time to confront them. I couldn't keep letting them undermine me in my own home, so I waited until dinner that night and laid it all out. I told them I knew about the family history, that I understood they might feel resentful, but that didn't give them the right to invade my life and treat me like a placeholder for something they'd lost. I expected them to deny it, or maybe even apologize. But instead, they just stared at me with these cold, calculating expressions. Finally, Mason leaned forward and said, "So you do know. That makes this easier." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What are you talking about?" Chloe, who'd been sitting silently the whole time, finally spoke up. "Lucas, we're not here to take over your life. We're here to reclaim what should have been ours. Our family was supposed to have a certain standing in society, a certain respect. You wouldn't understand." I could barely believe what I was hearing. Respect? Standing in society? This isn't the 19th century, Chloe. You're acting like some old-school aristocrats who think they're entitled to a throne. Mason smiled, and it was the kind of smile that sent a shiver down my spine. Call it what you want, but our family lost something when your side took control, and we're here to set that right. We've been preparing for this, Lucas. All you had to do was let us fit in. Fit in? I was practically shouting now. You're trying to replace me. Chloe looked at me with that same condescending pity she'd used before. You're being dramatic. We're not replacing you. We're just taking the place we were meant to have. At that point, I realized they didn't see this as manipulation or even theft. They genuinely believed they were justified, that this was some twisted version of a family right. They saw themselves as rightful heirs to something that never even existed. When I told them I wanted them out, Chloe's face twisted into a scowl. Lucas, don't be foolish. We have as much right to be here as you do. And if you push us out, well, we might just have to let people know how unstable you've been lately. That stopped me cold. Unstable? Are you threatening me? Not at all, she said sweetly. We're just concerned. You've been so erratic lately, acting like everyone's out to get you. We don't want anyone to worry. I realized then that they'd been setting this up all along. Every little whisper, every suggestion to my friends and coworkers, it was all part of a plan to paint me as unbalanced, so if I tried to stand up to them, no one would believe me. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, with no way out. They had all the leverage, and I was just alone, in my own house, cornered by people who were supposed to be my family but were more like invaders. So now I'm reaching out again. Reddit? I'm exhausted, mentally and physically, and I feel like they're closing in on every aspect of my life. How do I fight back? How do I make people see what they're doing before they ruin me completely? Final update. All right, Reddit. Things have spiraled even further, and I'm beginning to realize the depth of my cousin's manipulation. Mason and Chloe are more entrenched in my life than ever, and every attempt I've made to regain control has backfired. They're not just after my house or my lifestyle. They're after my entire identity, my credibility, and maybe even my sanity. I've started documenting everything because I'm at the point where I need evidence, something to prove what's really going on. After the last confrontation, where they essentially warned me that pushing back could make me look unstable, I became hyper-aware of how much they'd actually infiltrated my world. Chloe was continuing her subtle campaign with my friends and coworkers, and I started hearing odd remarks from people at work. My boss, Laura, casually asked if everything was all right at home, saying Chloe had mentioned I'd been under a lot of stress lately. When I pressed her on it, Laura gave me a strange look, saying she just assumed my family was looking out for me. I tried to explain that Chloe and Mason were overstaying their welcome, but it came out sounding defensive and paranoid, exactly what they wanted. Meanwhile, Mason was making subtle moves to undermine me at every turn. He'd leave comments on my social media posts that painted me as irresponsible or frivolous. Things like, maybe if you worked as hard as you partied, you'd have more time to spend with family, or some people appreciate what they have. I didn't think much of it at first, but then a close friend texted me, asking if I was okay, saying that Mason had mentioned I'd been struggling with finding direction. It's like they were creating this image of me as some kind of unstable black sheep. Then, a few days ago, I found out Mason had reached out to my landlord. I know, it sounds crazy. I own my house, but there's a small plot of land behind my property that I rent for storage and a workshop space. When I went to check on it, I found out Mason had tried to negotiate with the landlord on my behalf, saying I was going through a tough time and that they wanted to help me manage my responsibilities. My landlord mentioned this in passing, assuming it was a simple misunderstanding, but it was enough to make me realize how far they were willing to go. They were positioning themselves as caretakers, making it seem like I was incapable of handling my own life. With every move they made, I felt the walls closing in further. They were undermining me in small, almost invisible ways, so that if I tried to fight back, it would look like I was being paranoid or overly sensitive. I needed a plan, and fast. That's when I remembered a detail from my research into our family history. My grandfather had kept journals, dozens of them, apparently, recording everything from business meetings to family disputes. They'd been boxed up and stored away in my mom's basement for years. I drove over, hoping to find something, anything, that would give me leverage. I spent hours sifting through old papers, documents and photos, feeling like I was grasping at straws. And then I found it. In one of the journals, there was a detailed account of the falling out between my grandfather and Mason's grandfather. According to my grandfather's notes, Mason's grandfather had been in debt, serious debt. My grandfather had bailed him out multiple times, trying to keep the business afloat. The final straw came when Mason's grandfather had siphoned money from the company for personal use, nearly bankrupting them. That's when my grandfather bought him out, effectively saving the business but ending their partnership and the family relationship. The story Mason and Chloe had been fed was a lie. Their grandfather wasn't wronged. He was the one who'd misused the family's resources, and my grandfather had done what he had to do to protect his own family. I finally had something concrete to confront them with, something to break through their delusion. That night, after dinner, I sat them down and showed them the journal. Mason looked at it with a mix of skepticism and irritation, while Chloe just crossed her arms, unimpressed. "So, what's this supposed to prove?" Mason sneered. "That your side of the family wrote their own version of the story? Big deal." "This isn't just a version of the story, Mason," I shot back. "It's documented evidence. Our grandfather kept records. He saved your grandfather from debt multiple times, and your grandfather tried to drain the business for himself. He wasn't cut out unfairly. He was bailed out and he still ruined things." Chloe rolled her eyes. "People write whatever they want to justify their actions, Lucas. We're not here to argue ancient history. Then why are you here?" I demanded, my frustration finally boiling over. "Why go through all of this? Why sabotage my life, my relationships, my work? What are you actually trying to achieve?" Mason leaned forward, his eyes dark. "You just don't get it, do you? This isn't about you personally. This is about restoring balance. Our family was supposed to be something, a name that people respected, a family that mattered. Your side took that away from us. We grew up hearing about what we should have had, the life we could have led if it hadn't been stolen. You've had a life of privilege, and we're just here to take back what was meant for us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They didn't want a house or a job or even revenge. They wanted some twisted idea of restoration, a fantasy version of what their lives could have been. They were willing to tear me down just to feel like they'd won something. "So what?" I said. "You're just going to live here, ruin my life, and call it even? That's insane." Chloe smiled, her expression chillingly calm. "No, Lucas. We're not trying to ruin your life. We're trying to make sure our family has a place in this world. We're taking what's owed to us." At that point, I realized they were beyond reasoning. They weren't interested in facts or reality. They were driven by this warped sense of entitlement, fueled by years of family resentment. And now, they were threatening to paint me as mentally unstable if I tried to fight back. I felt like I was staring into the eyes of two people who had fully convinced themselves that they were righteous, that they were owed my life. I knew I needed evidence, more than just my word, to prove what they were doing. So I started secretly recording our conversations. I set up my phone in discreet spots around the house, capturing their threats, their comments about my unfit state of mind, and their twisted rationale for why they deserved my life more than I did. I even managed to get Mason on tape saying, "If he won't step aside, we'll make it so he has no choice." Once I had enough, I reached out to a lawyer. I explained everything, showing him the recordings, the texts, and the documents I'd gathered. He listened carefully, nodding in understanding, and finally said, "This is more than just a family dispute. They're engaging in harassment and emotional manipulation. You might even have grounds for a restraining order." It was a relief to hear someone validate my experience, to finally have someone who saw the situation for what it was. My lawyer advised me to keep gathering evidence and to start reaching out to friends and family to explain my side. He said the sooner I took control of the narrative, the harder it would be for them to twist it. The next day, I called up Jamie and a few other close friends, explaining everything. At first, they were shocked, but once I showed them the recordings, they were horrified. Jamie admitted she'd had doubts about Chloe's stories, but hadn't wanted to pry. She offered to spread the word, letting people know the truth, helping me rebuild my reputation that Mason and Chloe had tried so hard to dismantle. With the support of my friends, I felt my confidence returning. I confronted Mason and Chloe, telling them that I'd documented everything and that if they didn't leave, I would take legal action. They tried to bluff, saying no one would believe me, but when I played back one of the recordings, their faces went pale. Chloe sputtered, You were recording us? That's illegal. Actually, it's perfectly legal in this state, I replied, feeling a surge of triumph. And now, I have proof of everything you've done. You wanted to take over my life? Well, that plan's over. Get out. They tried to argue, but I didn't give them the chance. I made it clear that if they weren't out by the end of the day, I'd be pressing charges. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had control again. They packed their things, and as they left, Mason gave me one last, venomous look. You'll regret this, Lucas. We were doing you a favor. But as they walked out the door, all I felt was relief. After Mason and Chloe finally left, the house felt eerily silent, as though it was recovering from an invisible storm. Every corner held reminders of the chaos they'd unleashed, furniture they'd moved, the strange energy that lingered, the empty spaces where they'd marked their temporary territory. I thought that would be the end of it, that maybe, finally, I could return to my life. But Mason's parting words echoed in my mind. Asterisk, you'll regret this. We were doing you a favor. Asterisk. I didn't want to believe they'd follow through on their threats. But within a week, the fallout began. Chloe started spreading lies on social media, painting me as unstable and paranoid. She spun a story of how they'd come to support a struggling family member and ended up being forced out. Friends who hadn't seen the recordings reached out with concern, asking if I was okay, offering support but with an undertone that they were unsure of what to believe. Meanwhile, Mason sent me a series of cryptic texts, implying he'd dug up old family secrets that could be damaging if released. He hinted at everything from financial missteps by our grandfather to vague, scandalous truths about my own past, things he'd twisted or outright fabricated to sound damaging. They were determined to fight me from a distance, to cast a shadow over my reputation. But this time, I was prepared. With my lawyer's guidance, I kept everything documented. I posted my own statement online, addressing the situation with as much clarity and transparency as possible, emphasizing the manipulation I'd endured. Friends like Jamie rallied around me, sharing my side of the story, countering Chloe's claims, and redirecting any skeptical friends to the recordings I'd collected. The support was overwhelming, and slowly, I felt the tide shifting back in my favor. After a month of tense silence, I finally felt the worst had passed. My life was beginning to return to normal. I could enjoy my home again without feeling like an intruder. I reconnected with friends who distanced themselves, and my work stabilized, with coworkers standing by me. In the end, I realized how close I'd come to losing everything. But I also learned the importance of standing firm, of knowing my own worth, and of setting boundaries, even with family.